Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Climate-Wise Communities Bushfire Workshop. My name is James Chan. I'm a Sustainability Project Officer here at Ku-ring-gai Council. And on behalf of Council, I recognise the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand. Ku-ring-gai Council is proud of its Aboriginal heritage and culture. We are especially recognise this in my welcome to you. Joining us today for the workshop is Dr. Jenny Scott, the Sustainability Project Leader. We have Mark Schuster to the side of Jenny. He is Council's Bushfire Technical Officer. With us from the RFS is Sam Tucker, and from Fire and Rescue will be Kim Simpson, but he's not here just yet. And we have a very special guest, Dr. Penny Burns, a specialist in disaster medicine. Is that correct? You did send me your profile before, but I forgot to read it.
No, that's okay. Yeah, disaster medicine, and I'm a GP as well. So
brilliant. Okay.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for that, Penny. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We have a Q&A function in Zoom. You might be able to see that at either the bottom of your screen or at the top of your screen. So that is where you can put your questions into us. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar. However, we will generally address your questions at the end, unless someone in the panel would like to answer your question, via typing their response into the Q&A. So also there is a chat function. Now, the chat is only really for you if you have a technical issue, like you can't hear us or there's just general issues you want to raise. But any questions that you want us to respond to, please put that in the Q&A. Also, please do not use the raise your hand function, because we won't address you until the end of the webinar when we do the Q&A. So please just keep that in mind. So I'd like to give you a quick rundown of how the workshop will proceed. I'll give you a brief introduction to the Climate-Wise Communities Program. Then I'll hand over to Dr. Jenny Scott, who will present to you the campfire reconstruction. That is a fire that devastated the town of Paradise in California, followed by a reconstruction of the Gosford Mountain fire that happened during the Black Summer of 2019-20. After that, we will do a bushfire simulation of a fire that could potentially happen in South Turramurra. And then we'll cut to a Q&A session where we will be able to hear your questions and answer them. And also we'll have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Penny Burns about the project she is involved in and how you can look after your health during a bushfire or potentially any other natural disaster. Okay, so the Climate-Wise Communities Program and Workshop was developed in the wake of the 2009 Black Saturday fires, and it incorporates the findings from the Royal Commission. One of the key findings was that very few people had bushfire survival plans, and those that did have plans, none of them worked very well. So the aim of this workshop is to show you what a worst-case bushfire scenario is, and how you can plan for that, and how to make a very high quality bushfire survival plan at that. So when we show you the worst case scenario, this is the situation you need to plan for, and that if anything happens that's not as bad as that, well then you will be well prepared. So the system table is a bit of technology that will be used to show these fires for you, and it's something we purchased back in 2019. And it's former US military technology that has been commercialized for the use of bushfire simulations and community engagement. And I will now start sharing my screen, and we'll start with the campfire. So bear with me. And once you can see the area here, I will pass over to Dr. Jenny Scott to begin the narration of this fire. So anytime you're ready, Jenny.
Okay, thanks, James. So we show you this fire as an example of what an extreme event can look like. Now, this area in Northern California in Butte County is not all that different from Ku-ring-gai. It has a lot of ridge-top development and forested valleys. And we're just going to show you this event that happened in 2018. It's called the Camp Fire because it originated in Camp Creek Road, and the ignition source was a fallen power line. Now, the power line went down about 6:15 in the morning, and the people in the townships of Pulga and even right across to Paradise, where you can see in the middle, could see the smoke and were ringing their 911 service to notify them that there was a fire. And the fire services dispatched fire trucks out to put this out quickly because the weather was extremely dry and had been for some time. They'd had a very wet spring the spring before, so there was a lot of vegetation on the ground. And the temperature was around 35 degrees with the winds coming at about 85 kilometres an hour off the desert. So scorching hot winds. And at 6:15 in the morning, the winds were blowing at over 80 kilometres an hour. So the fire trucks, when they went out to attempt to get to the source of this fire, couldn't actually reach it because of the winding mountain roads, and they were too narrow for the trucks to navigate. And the aircraft couldn't fly because the wind speeds were above their operating maximum. So this fire ran unchecked. Now you can see there is a little counter down the bottom, which if you have extremely good eyesight, you could read. And it's telling you the time that passes. Now, James speeds this up, obviously, because we don't want to sit here for 6 hours and watch this fire burn. But as the fire progresses, there are warnings put out to the northern parts of Pulga. You can see Pulga just to the south of the fire front. And it was within a few minutes, the calls that started reporting fire, they then started to say there's actually fire in the area. Now, if you look carefully over towards the west, which is to your left, you'll see a spot fire has started. And the spot fire is getting close to the township of Ku-ring-gai. So the community of Ku-ring-gai didn't receive any warnings that this fire was impacting their area before it hit the town around 7:15 a.m. Now, you'll see Ku-ring-gai is actually marked on the map further south, but it is up around that lake. And so nobody had a warning about this. And at 7:07, the fire was reported in Ku-ring-gai as being with high winds, and they described the fire as ripping. So that's only less than an hour after the fire has started. So you can see it's moving very quickly. So as you can see, there are more spot fires starting up over near the township of Paradise. Now, emergency calls are coming into the Paradise emergency network at the rate of about, hang on, I missed a other thing there. They were told originally there was no danger, that the fire was to the north and it wouldn't be necessary to evacuate. But by 8 a.m., it had entered the eastern suburbs of the township of Paradise. And several minutes later, the Butte County Sheriff's Department issued evacuation orders for the entire town. Most of the residents of Ku-ring-gai and many from Paradise were unable to evacuate before the fire arrived. Due to the rapid spread of the fire, firefighters, for the most part, never attempted to control the fire, but rather just concentrated on trying to save lives. According to the California fire chief, as the fire was burning through Paradise, pretty much it's destroying the township of Paradise. It's that kind of devastation. The wind that was predicted came and it's just wiping us out. Now you can see where those spot fires are occurring. If you look closely, it's cutting off the exits out of the town progressively. It's cut the road to the north, it's cut the road to the south, and it's only leaving one exit route across to the west. But you'll now see that more spot fires have started right next to that road that was the last exit out. So in effect, the people of this township have now been trapped in this town. And within the town, there were quite heavily forested areas as well. The first hours of the fire saw a cascade of failures in the emergency alert system because it was rooted in a patchwork network with an opt-in nature and compounded by the loss of 17 cell phone towers. These points of failure in a fast-moving event allowed no room for error on the ground by anyone. Thousands of 911 calls inundated the 2 emergency dispatchers on duty. Emergency alerts suffered from human error as city officials failed to include 4 at-risk areas in evacuation orders. Technical errors on the day meant that the emergency alerts failed to reach 94% of the residents of Paradise. In the first 4 hours of the campfire, it caused 86 civilian fatalities, with 12 civilian and 5 firefighters injured. There were over 18,800 structures destroyed and 62,000 of hectares burnt. And this is in just the first 4 hours, with a total damage bill of 16.5 billion, of which 4 billion were uninsured losses. And still to this day, this particular fire is the worst forest fire in American history. Now, when we look at the lessons we can learn from this type of fire, it just goes to show the American firefighting service is so well resourced. They have every technical capability, very sophisticated service, and yet they were helpless in the face of this fire. So it just goes to show the reasons why we need people to prepare themselves for this type of event and not depend on emergency alerts or having firefighters there to help them, because you can see how those plans so easily come unstuck. A question I'd like to ask Penny at this point is, apart from the physical impacts of this fire, I believe there are a lot of mental health impacts. Is that common?
So actually, there are definitely physical health effects, and then there's also mental health effects. But in actual fact, even though there's lots of stresses that do occur during a disaster, the vast majority of people manage to cope and recover and move forward with their lives. So there is a lot of distress that occurs during these bushfires, and it depends a lot and vary on the person and the actual experience. And I guess the key thing is that these are huge, enormous events. And so, you know, normal reactions are to be distressed, to deny what's going on and have disbelief. And people can sort of have all sorts of different exposures. If they've been more exposed to the fire, they can be just as severely affected as if they've just seen it on the media. So no reaction is wrong, or every single reaction is just that individual's reaction to that extraordinary event. And there's basically, I guess the mental health effects coalesce with the physical health effects. And so simple things around keeping yourself, you know, healthy and well during those times are really important. So I guess the mental stress of being there during this time is quite intense. And we need to focus on those that are more at higher risk. And those include children and people with lots of health conditions. And we need to, I guess, really think about getting those people out early if we can.
Right. Thank you, Penny. Okay, James, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Okay, so for the next part of the workshop, I will turn over to the Gospers Mountain fire. This was a fire I'm sure everyone is very familiar with, because it was a fire that happened during the 2019-20 Black Summer. Now, this fire was, of course, was known as the mega fire. And bear with me while I set myself up here. So this fire was an absolutely huge fire. And it started on the 26th of October 2019 and was only put out by extreme rainfall around about the 8th of February 2020. The fire burnt 512,000 hectares, 90 homes were lost, and countless animals and insects were killed as well, along with devastating impact on the plant life of the national park. So the conditions leading up to the fire were that it was the hottest and driest year on record. 3 years from January 2017 to December 2019, areas of New South Wales had had the lowest rainfall on record. All of New South Wales was declared in drought. And also records were being set for the number of days with very high or greater fire danger. There's also no evidence that the fire was driven by high fuel loads or poor forest management. It is most likely the fact that there were average fuel loads and record-breaking fuel dryness that led to the intensity of the fires. And I want to draw your attention to the record-breaking dryness, fuel dryness, because like I said, the years leading up to this, it was extremely dry and it was a major drought. There were even reports of crown fires in recently burnt areas in the Blue Mountains areas, and in the Blue Mountain area. And what that means is that even though an area had been burnt, a fire came through the canopy of the trees. So despite all the fuel on the ground being burnt up, we still had a fire. So the fire now the Gosford Mountain fire was started through a lightning strike on the 26th. There was a storm in the region that had 19,000 lightning strikes. However, it just took one that started this one. Now the fire started at 10:55 in the morning, but then within 2.5 hours, the fire was around about, say, 65, had burnt an area of 65 hectares. Also, on the day, there were high winds, just like in the campfire you just saw. The winds were around 60 kilometers to 70 kilometers per hour, which meant helicopters could not fly and rapid response firefighters could not be deployed in time. The wind also made this a very fast moving fire. By the 27th, the next day, the fire had burnt 520 hectares. And it's worth noting that at this point in time, there were fires up and down the east coast of Australia, and the firefighting resources were very thinly stretched. So there were not many resources available to really deal with this fire at this point in time. So as this fire burnt for over 3 months, this reconstruction you'll be seeing here, it does cover a long period of time. So I will need to speed up the fire and slow it down at various points. So the next key part of the fire was around the 7th of November. And I'll speed things up. So that's why you're seeing the fire move pretty quickly. It didn't happen like this in reality. It wasn't this fast, but it still was quite a big and fast moving fire. Okay, so as we creep up to the 7th of November, this was a day that saw a very large fire run. Now, on the 7th of November, the fire traveled about 12 kilometers in just about 1 day. And that's a pretty big fire run by all accounts. And when the fire got to this size, there really wasn't much that could stop it. So we're on the 6th of November now, and just keep an eye out for that 12-kilometer run that I just mentioned. It will burn towards the southwest, and there it is there. That's that 12-kilometer fire run in about 1 day. So the next big fire run happened on the 12th of November. And I'll fast forward to that one as well. However, this day was quite a bit different to the 7th, in that it was the first time a catastrophic fire danger day was declared in New South Wales. Now, on this day, we saw the fire cover about 12 kilometers in about 2.5 hours. So again, just keep an eye out on the southwest corner of the fire, and you'll see what I mean by a big fire run, a very fast moving fire run. It was also on this day that pyrocumulonimbus was spotted over the fire grounds, with RFS volunteers witnessing lightning strikes starting more spot fires around the area. Now, bear in mind, the fire progresses to the north and southern boundaries of the fire, so it wasn't just in the southwest. And by the end of the day, the fire would have burnt 56,000 hectares and has a perimeter of 170 kilometers. And there you go. What you saw just there was that big fire run I mentioned. The 12th of October November was also the same day that the Canoon Road fire broke out. So Jenny, Sam, do you want to talk about what happened on that day and what it was like fighting that fire?
I guess one to remember is that from June that year, we were actually fighting fires from Queensland. And by that time, we were also having, because it's outside of Sydney, fire blowing. So there are a lot of enlisted firefighters. I myself fought fires in Queensland, Tenterfield, Glen Innes, Grafton, Goulburn, and the ACT, and other members of our brigade elsewhere. So by the time this fire started to take hold, we were all very tired, and we could tell that this was serious, particularly as it could impact where we live.
Cool. Thank you, Sam. So now the next key point I have to point out is the effect ember attack has on the way fire behaves. As you can see on the bottom of that fire there, just to the southeast of the fire there, you see another spot fire pop up, creating another fire that will join the main body of the fire front. And so during the progression of this fire, you'll see other spot fires popping up ahead of the fire. And what this does, the effect of this has is essentially speeds the fire up. It makes it grow a lot faster. And so I'll quickly fast forward to the 26th of October and zoom out again because things just get bigger and bigger. On the 26th, saw a period of storm activity. Now, this storm activity leads to a microburst that brought down a lot of trees in the Pymble area, especially and Gordon area. In fact, Ku-ring-gai Council car park and the surrounds got hammered pretty badly with a lot of trees falling down. But the same storm activity was also responsible for lightning strikes in the area that started what was called the Little L Complex, the Thompson's Creek, and 3 Mile Creek fires. So those fires happen on to the northeast of the main fire front. And I'll quickly speed things up so you can see what that looks like. And while that happens, also keep an eye out for in the southwest and east of the fire because more ember attacks, so more embers that now burn the fire front cause more spot fires. So anyway, there you go. You can see it there. Those 3 dots to the north of the fire, those were caused by lightning strikes. And we have other lightning strikes happening to the north of the fire, making the fire even bigger and bigger. So as we move into December 5th, this is when those fires join the main body of the Gospels Mountain fire. And at this point, the fire was known as the Mega Blaze because it is absolutely enormous and is actually the largest fire in Australian history. And when all is said and done with this fire, it will be 5 times the size of Singapore. So I'll just zoom out again in case you guys can't see it. So the next key point in this fire was on the 14th of December. Now, this was the date in which where backburn was planned in the Mount Wilson area. Now, the Mount Wilson area is down at the very bottom of the screen, down near the Bells Line of Road, somewhere where it's to the east of Lithgow, around that area. And that's backburn there. Sorry, I missed that part. It happens very quickly. What happened when this backburn was started was that the weather conditions for that day were predicted to be mild, with little or no wind. However, by 2 p.m., the fire picked up from the southwesterly direction. And at this stage, the backburn had already been started. And within half an hour, fire crews were doing proper protection. And I'll just wind it back a bit, just so you can see exactly how fast that was. This caught everyone off guard and unfortunately led to some property damage there. And at this stage, the fire is now around about, say, 350,000 hectares in size. So from this point onwards, the fire just gets larger and larger. And you'll note down in the bottom, in the southeast corner of the fire, near the Hawkesbury River, that's where a lot of effort was put to hold back the fire, because if the fire was to jump the Hawkesbury River, there wouldn't be much stopping it from reaching the North Shore. In fact, fire experts estimated that had the fire jumped the Hawkesbury River, which is quite easily done, the fire could easily have reached the North Shore in about 1 day's time. But we're very fortunate with the weather, and very fortunate with the hard work that was put in by the RFS crews that set up fire breaks and backburns that helped hold back the fire and kept it away from the North Shore. So what we could take away from this was that the fires can move very quickly and could potentially lead to mass evacuations in the North Shore, and those evacuations would very unlikely go smoothly. And as we saw in this reconstruction of the fire, embers can travel up to 20 kilometers ahead of the main fire front, and that's something which we'll discuss in the next section there. Now, this fire was only put out when there was extreme rainfall in the early days of February 2020. That rainfall event saw the Warragamba Dam fill from 40% up to 90%. So that was a phenomenal amount of rain, but that was what was required in order to put the fire out. So I'll pause things here now and pass it back over to Dr. Jenny Scott, who will take us through a bushfire scenario in the South Turramurra area.
Thanks, James. So I guess the reason that we show you those two major fires is for you to get a better understanding how fire can behave. Now, one occurred in a populated area and one occurred in an unpopulated area. But nevertheless, the impact by the fire in the unpopulated area from an environmental point of view was devastating. Billions of animals are lost in those fires, and given the fragile state of many of our threatened species, they can ill afford that impact. So we're going to look now at what would it look like if one of those events occurred in Ku-ring-gai. And we're going to focus on the South Turramurra area, as that's the area of interest to you guys at the moment. And we'll see just how a fire might behave under different weather conditions. Now, just hold on 1 second. Mark, could you ask the cleaner to move on?
I'll try.
Thanks.
Try, yeah.
Sorry, our cleaner's a bit over-enthusiastic. So we can see there's a blue wheel on the top left-hand corner of the image there. And that actually allows us to control the wind speed and the direction of the wind. Now, set into the software behind this program is a temperature of 35 degrees and a very low humidity setting. So also built in is what's called the Anderson 13 fire model, which shows how fires react to slope. So fast upslope, slower downslope. And then the embers that you'll see come off the fire tend to come off the tops of the ridges as the fire burns over the ridge. And as the wind speed picks up, those spot fires go further and further ahead of the fire front. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the wind direction and just see how the fire responds to that change in wind direction. So we're going to ignite the fire now. And every now and then we're going to stop and we're going to look at the ClimateWise Communities site, because we're showing you the problem, but at the same time, we're showing you how you can deal with this problem. Okay, so the fire has started. Now, Sam, what would RFS be doing at this point?
On a fire danger rating day of catastrophic, we would actually have preemptive strike teams. We have either RFS volunteer members standing by at station or within 20 minutes of station. And most of Greater Sydney would actually be on high alert for the actuality of a fire starting on a day like this, because it would be so hard to manage.
Right. Okay, thank you. And what sort of fire warning might be going out, on the Fires Near Me app?
Okay, because this is likely to impact all sorts of communities, as this definitely North Epping would sorry, I'm trying to look at the map on my phone, so it's a little distorted. The areas that would be impacted almost certainly would probably be North Epping would be getting emergency warnings to leave now. Depending on the expected speed of the fire, Hazards Near Me, which has replaced Fires Near Me, would be giving automatic updates to every resident that might be impacted if in fact there is mobile coverage at this time.
Right. Yes, I keep forgetting it's had a name change, Hazards Near Me, from Fires Near Me.
Yeah.
That's because it's a multi-hazard tool now, correct?
That's correct. So it also looks at storm and flood damage. I think to bring together the idea, which Penny could probably speak to, that there are a variety of hazards that we face on the east coast of Australia, and to be aware of them and to have watch zones set up is really integral to remaining resilient.
Right. Thanks, Sam. So we'll just at this stage, we'll pause the fire. You can see already a second fire has ignited from an ember, and it has made that fire a much more immediate threat to those urban areas. But we'll just flick over and look at climate-wise communities, the first step, so you can see what are the sorts of things you might be able to do to make yourself more resilient to one of these major events. So James will just take us over there. Won't he?
The internet's a little bit slow, so bear with me.
Ah, yes. When all else fails, blame the internet. No, that's not true. Okay.
See, I told you.
Yeah, you were right, James. Okay, so what we're going to show you is the Climate-Wise Communities website, and you'll see there are 5 steps here. And the first step, it allows you to better understand the hazards that your property might face and the sorts of things that you might want to include in your bushfire plan. Now, we actually encourage people to do a multi-hazard plan. It gets a little complicated for some people to do a multi-hazard. So we have set this up in a way where you can look at all disaster hazards, all extreme weather disaster hazards, or you can just focus in on one. So tonight, for the purposes of efficiency, we're just going to focus on bushfire. So in this first step, it's about mapping your location. So what happens here is we go down and we actually put in an address, just a random address, and it will show you an outline of your property. So you put in your address. Shows you an outline of the property when it crystallizes. And those coloured zonings, which will become much more distinct in a moment, are the sorts of hazards that you're exposed to. Now, this particular property, the blue is the flooding, the red is radiant heat, and the yellow is ember attack. So when we scroll down, you'll get a little summary of the hazards that your property is vulnerable to? Aren't we, James? Yes, so this particular property ticks all the boxes, and not in the good way. So it's a hazard bushfire, ember attack, exit issues, so it only has one way in and out. It's vulnerable to flood, and every property in Ku-ring-gai is vulnerable to storm and heat wave. So this particular property, when the owners would be doing their planning, they would want to try and keep all the hazards in mind. And in particular, they will decide which hazard is the one that is most likely to cause the most difficult effects for them. So that's the first step. The second step is looking at your personal situation. And this is where you get a better understanding of your family's capacity to handle this kind of an event, or at least the people living in your house. And you've got to have a lot of contingencies built in here, because things can change very quickly. And you might have visitors staying, or you might be home alone. So you've got to cater for all these possible variations in your conditions in your household on the day. So if James scrolls down again, this is just a series of tick the box questions, asking, do you live alone? Do you live with children? Do you live with people with special needs? And everywhere where you see you tick a box, there's some advice comes up saying what you might need to consider when you develop your plan. So I'll just go to Penny here. From a health point of view, when these people decide to evacuate, what sort of things should they take with them?
Yeah, so look, it's really important, I guess, in this scenario that if you're someone who's got a number of health conditions, you need to think about considering getting out a little bit earlier. Particularly, I mean, one of the things that comes up as one of the hazards, I guess, is smoke as well from the bushfires. And we saw huge smoke after the 2019-2020 bushfires, just all up and down the coast. And a huge number of people that were nowhere near the bushfires actually got affected by smoke. So one of the key things to do is to look at what particular health conditions you have and sort of tailor your plan to that. So if you've got pre-existing conditions that might be affected by smoke, like asthma or chronic lung disease or heart disease, you might want to think about going a little bit earlier. If you're particularly anxious or worried, so if you've got, if you get really concerned about those things, again, you might want to think about going earlier, just so that you can put that into your plan. You know you've got that plan, and being ready and having a plan actually helps you cope with what's going on, because it takes away that helplessness that you feel when these huge events are occurring, these huge disasters are coming, and it gives you something to focus on, and you feel like you've got a bit of control in these sort of environments. And heat waves are, Jenny's mentioned heat waves in the hazard section. Heat waves are huge, and they are one of our biggest issues in health. So they don't seem to be that sinister, but they cause lots of issues, particularly for the elderly, and in terms of affecting medications as well. And so again, with heat waves, you need to really consider that when there's a big fire and there's often heat. I think there was 35 degrees mentioned. So again, while the fire's on and you can see the smoke, you also have to think about the heat. So what would you take with you? You need a to-go bag by the door. You need to have 14 days of medication in that to-go bag. Lots of other things, but from a health perspective, you need to have a health summary printed out by your GP with all your medications listed. You'll be amazed how you can't remember any of them when you are under stress and trying to evacuate and you're in an evacuation centre. Oh, I'm on a little red pill. I don't even know what it's for. You also want to have a list of the people that you actually use as your health professionals. So your GP, your specialist, those sorts of people, because again, those numbers can get lost and forgotten. And you want to have, make sure that you've got a pet, you consider that in advance as well, and what the pet might need. And I guess really by having thought about what you need to do from a health perspective and getting ready, again, you're 10 steps ahead. And And we know that people who prepare for these things from a health point of view actually do better afterwards.
Great. Thanks, Penny. Yes, that point about pets is quite important, because there's a number of people who have lost their lives trying to rescue their pets. You know, and when there's a fire coming, the animal might hide under the house and you can't locate them, or you can't get them into a carry cage because they're very stressed because you're stressed. So getting out early, particularly when you have pets, and having contingencies built in as to who might be able to rescue your pet in the event that you're not home.
Jenny, can I just comment there too? The other thing is, from a pet point of view, there are a lot of dog bites, cat bites, animal bites in disasters, and they cause wounds and all sorts of things. And we know that an animal that's very frightened can sometimes cause issues. So again, that's a really good reason to get out early, to sort of put them somewhere safe in advance so that you don't end up with extra injuries.
Great. Thank you, Penny. Okay, so whether or not you have your own transport, so if you have your own transport, you can leave at whatever point you decide. If you're dependent on somebody else, then that's going to be a big incentive to leave early, because you don't want them being stuck there with you in case the roads get closed. They might be able to get in, or they mightn't be able to get out. English proficiency, if in your household or you know someone in your neighbour's household that their English isn't as good as you'd like, then you can help them understand the warnings and what's happening around. Home ownership is always a big one, because if you own your own home, you're able to make changes that are going to make your property more resilient. Whereas when you're renting, you're more reliant on the landlord to do that. And we'll be looking at that very closely in a moment about the property. Phone connections and communication. Now, as you saw in the Paradise Fire, the phone towers came down and the cellular system was lost. Now, that's not uncommon to happen, that our phone system goes down in storms. And if you lose power, then you lose your landline as well. So we suggest there that people have the emergency broadcaster, the ABC, either dialed in on their car radio or a transistor radio, because they will give you frequent updates as to what's happening in your area. And again, the Hazards Near Me app, which will update you as well as to what's going on in your immediate area. So that's the end of that step. And we'll go back to the fire for a little bit now and just see what happens as this fire continues. So there are several spot fires have started up, and you can see it's rapidly now impacting areas where there are houses. So Sam, what's the emergency services situation now?
I'm sure a lot of you would recall the fire at South Turramurra, and I'm getting goosebumps just looking at this. There would be a lot of activity. There'd be several areas in North Epping that may have properties under threat, so there would be and can I just reiterate, there will never be enough trucks to be in every street at every property, but we would be attempting to do property protection in North Epping. South Turramurra would now be receiving either emergency warnings to leave now or emergency warnings to shelter in place. It's not quite as close as the Canoon Road fire right now, but if the weather conditions change, there would be a lot of concern for the residents of South Turramurra there. We would have multiple resources from probably around Greater Sydney and hopefully the Central Coast if they were available, and Ku-ring-gai and the Hills District as well, supporting us along with fire and rescue.
Great. Okay, thanks, Sam. Okay, so we'll watch this fire for a little while and we'll increase the wind speed. Now, if you're looking carefully, you'll see as it goes down into the valleys, the fire seems to just grumble along, and then it hits an upward slope and it races up the upward slope. Just in terms of colour, the yellow edge of the fire is the fire front, and where it's red is fully involved in fire, and where it's black, it means it's burnt out, largely burnt out the vegetation. So you can see now it's taken a run right up through an urban area, and that will be an area that's upslope. And so the wind is blowing it forward and the slope is adding to its ability to travel faster. So at this point, we've got the fire services and everybody doing what they can. I'll just ask Mark if he might comment on what sort of things do councils do, or our council, do to help control this.
Yeah, Jenny, thanks. We've got a local emergency management group that will be set up with council, fire and rescue, RFS, police and main roads. And definitely the big issue would be the intersection, I'm sure, of Kissing Point Road and the Commonara. And police would, instead of using the traffic lights, would have to be there manually to get people out. South Turramurra is really one way in, one way out, as many people well know. So getting people out there safely would be a mammoth issue for the local emergency management committee in this case. It would be a major issue. You know how crowded it gets even at school time. Imagine if a fire came through at 9 a.m. or either 3 p.m, what the implications should be. So there's all those issues that have to be faced, particularly for South Turramurra. And I'd like to talk further on about hazard reductions when we get further along. So thanks, Jenny.
Right, thank you, Mark. Okay, so what can you do to make your property more resilient? So step 3 of Climate Wise Communities actually allows you to get a better understanding of the vulnerability features of your house and your property, and what you might be able to do to make them more resilient. Now, as Mark said, and he will address the issue of APZs and hazard reduction burns shortly, but in this case, we've got the fireys doing what they can do. We've got council doing what it can do. What we really need here, and where a big difference can be made, is what a property owner does to their own property. Now, that's not just in terms of controlling vegetation. It's also in terms of the condition that the property's in, the materials that are used. You'll see as we go down what makes a property more resilient. So I just click on bushfire here, and you'll see it's set up in looking at different aspects of your property. And the first one is the roof. Now, with the roof, depending on its design, it can trap leaves and embers more easily, whereas a simple design doesn't do that so much. The wind blows the embers and the leaves across the roof rather than traps them in little nooks and crannies. The material and age of the roof, in Ku-ring-gai we have a lot of brick and tile structures that are fairly old, and they tend to be very porous in terms of energy, yes, because we're not talking about energy, about airflow in and out. So it is much more easy for embers to get into the house. And one thing to remember is that as a fire front approaches a house, the research shows that the pressure, the change in air pressure between the house and the outside environment grows quite considerably. So you've got lower air pressure in the house and higher air pressure outside with the fire. And as a result, you're getting this inward sucking of air from the outside. And that's what helps suck all the embers into the house. Might suck them into the roof cavity because they're getting under tiles and broken masonry, etc. Or it might be that they're igniting through the walls, through the weep holes, through ventilation under doorways, etc. So that's something to consider as to how to ember-proof your property. And you're going to get be a big job or a smaller job, depending on your design and the materials. So the use of roof sprinklers. Now, the roof sprinkler that just sits along the ridge line has been demonstrated to be less effective than the sprinkler that goes around the perimeter of the gutter and basically creates a curtain of water. So those are things to consider. Roof lights, skylights, ventilators, and anywhere where air can get in, you need to consider you might need to put some kind of ember mesh there to stop the embers getting in those openings. Eaves and fascia boards, often their condition and their material. And as we scroll down, we'll go down to the gutters and the drain pipe. And you always hear RFS saying, clean your gutters out. So that's definitely something that you need to do. And also you can fill your gutters with water, and that will help reduce the likelihood of ignition by embers. The walls, the material, the condition of those walls, whether you've got flanking paint over timber, for example, whether you've got brick, whether you've got more flame and radiant heat resistant material, or whether it's very vulnerable. And we look at windows and frames. Interestingly, windows and frames is one of the most vulnerable spots in a house. So the glass can crack and blow in with just the radiant heat. And so some people on the bushland facing side of their properties will get tempered glass or even double glazing on those windows, and they will have metal frames rather than wooden frames. And also on top of that, you have the metal fly screens, which also helps protect the windows to an extent. So you've got those considerations. The external doors, just how fireproof they are. And of course, just how well they're sealed, because the embers often blow under the door. So having those weather strips that will resist the embers, so if they're rubber, they'll melt. If you get the metal ones, there's less likely of that happening. The garage door is another very vulnerable spot that people have often failed to consider. And the floor, looking at the floor and the subfloor area is quite important, because fires can ignite material that's stored under the floor, or if you have a timber floor, the ignition of the timber floor itself by burning debris coming under the house, particularly obviously if your house is on piers. Not such an issue with cement slab houses. So verandas and decking, there are a lot of products out there now that claim that their timber is fire resistant. So you might consider replacing old timber decks with something that is more fire resistant. And then we look at the outdoors, you know, the vertical barriers. So look at the way you can shield your building from the heat. And that might be in part to do with landscaping. So some people put in like earth mounds to give themselves a bit of protection from that radiant heat. Other people metal fencing. So it just depends on your particular area and what you are able to put in place. The water supply, people need to be very aware that when the fire is on, the water supply is not going to be at all reliable. So Sam, do you want to comment on that?
So just for example, the South Turramurra fire, I was the second fire scene. We parked quite near the Scout or Guide Hall, near Canoon Road, and were unable to get out on the bushland side of our truck because of the radiant heat. East the road from that. had no water coming from their taps and hoses within probably 5 minutes of the streets being lined by fire trucks. So there's a good chance, particularly when you think that a fire truck holds 3,000 litres of water, and the event of a fire, we're going through that 50 sciences at the South Turramurra blocks away to have enough pressure from the hydrants to refill out. So as a resident, you can never assume there will be water when you need it. So having some storage of water or the capacity when the fire is passed to spot fires is really important consideration.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Okay, so we're almost at the end of this section about your property, but there's looking at fences and gates, because if you've got a timber fence leading up to your house, it creates a very nice wick to take the fire straight up to your house. With gas bottles, you want to turn the gas bottle so that the gas tap is pointing away from the house, because gas tanks are designed to vent when they heat up, and that means you'll get a flame shooting out from the gas tank rather than it exploding. And you don't want it pointing to the house, otherwise it will bring your house down pretty quickly. So you have to make sure that that tap's turned away from the house. And of course, if you've got gas bottles on your barbecue, storing them in a place where if they do ignite or vent, they're not going to damage your buildings. Again, we're just looking at the house age and standard, and air conditioners. Doormats often catch fire and then cause the fire to ignite the house. Again, back to pets. If your decision is going to be stay and defend, where are you going to put those pets while you fight the fire? Where will they be safe? So I know a few people who have left their pets in the house only for the house to have caught fire. They get out, but the pets don't. So again, it would be safer to take your pets away from the location long before the fire is anywhere near, and you go back and stay and defend if that's what you want to do. But when you look at all these considerations we've got here about the house, you've got to have a think about just how defendable would my house be, given all those criteria that we've just gone through. You know, is it reasonable prospect that you might be able to stay and defend, or is it a suicide mission? So, Penny, if somebody's going to stay and defend, do they need to be in really good health?
Oh, Jenny, yes, absolutely. The stress, I mean, you see the firefighters, I mean, Sam will vouch for this, but the stress involved in staying and the rapid changes that you need to adjust to. And you're in this incredible stress brain. So you haven't been through this before ever. The fireys have all been through this. They've rehearsed, they've practiced. But as an individual staying to defend, this is the first time you've done it. It's new. Things will happen you're not ready for. There's a huge amount. If you were defending your house and I was to take your blood pressure would be really high. Your heart rate will be going really fast. There's that heat that's also causing issues for you. And then there's the smoke and there's the embers. So all of that's going on while you're trying to make a clear decision, an emotive decision about how to save your house. If you've got chronic health conditions, such as diabetes, for example, that stress is going to be on top of that. And we know that that will cause issues with diabetes. So you really need to be physically fit, but you also, I mean, a message just comes out again and again, I think here, you need to be really prepared for anything you're going to do for it to work well.
Thanks, Penny. Okay, so the bell ratings. Mark, would you just like to explain what a bell rating is?
Yeah, sure, Jenny. It means bushfire attack level, and it comes from something called the Australian Standard for Bushfire Protection for Residences and Other Structures, AS 3959. There's from bell low right through to what they call bell flame zone. And the bell is based on what they call fire line intensity, which is really kilowatts per square metre. If I was in a bell low area, it might be 3 kilowatts per square metre. In firefighting gear, I could stand that for about half a minute or so. And you can get up to bell flame zone, which is about 50 to 60 kilowatts per square metre. So you can imagine the intensity, the radiant heat coming from that. So there's a number of categories for houses that came in about the late 1980s. Pre that, there were no bushfire regulations with regard to house structure and the bell ratings. So remember, most of Ku-ring-gai's houses were pre that stage. So yeah, it's anyone's guess to do with those structures. But a bell flame zone gives you some protection to up to, say, above a bell 40 rating, that the house may stand the pressures of that type of fire intensity against your wall. Bell 29, to upgrade from, say, a bell low to a bell 29 could cost about $50,000 to $60,000 these days. So yeah, it's a really good thing to upgrade your bell, and eventually that may feed through to the insurance companies. It's still very early days, but as I said before about hazard reductions, people rely on those. With future fire, I don't think people can rely so much on hazard reductions and APZs even. So the bell is the real issue for the future, I'd say, to upgrade, as we spoke about. Jenny was showing us the houses before and what can be done to up the bushfire protection of your house. So that's what bell is all about, and very, very important. If you do a DA with council and get a bushfire consultant in, they're going to look at your bell and what you have to do to upgrade. So yeah, pretty important stuff. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so we'll go back to the fire now and we'll see what it's up to. Now, remembering we've got very strong winds blowing, we've got very low moisture levels in the vegetation. We've got a temperature of about 35 degrees. So it's the ideal conditions for this fire to run and keep running. And it, again, like America, you can throw all the resources you like at these fires and they will still rage on, so long as there's fuel on the ground. So speaking of fuel on the ground, Mark, what about the hazard reduction burns and the APZs?
Yeah, I can tell you a fair bit about that. And recently, Council and Fire and Rescue had two hazard reductions on the eastern side of South Turramurra. One was called Robin Avenue, about 8 kilometres, a fairly big burn for us. Before, the fuel was about 23 to 24 tonnes a hectare. That's pretty strong. Would certainly carry a fire pretty quickly, given the wrong conditions, straight up into the canopy. So you get a canopy fire, which is almost unstoppable. And after the burn, the fuel was reduced by about half. I'm now monitoring 2 of those burns. Within one of them, about done a year ago, is almost up to the standard already after the rain, where the fuel is getting high enough to carry another fire. So it shows you that hazard reductions for more intense landscape fires just aren't the solution at all, nor are APZs. We like to put them in to give some reassurance to residents along the interface, which is 100 kilometres long or slightly more in Ku-ring-gai. But you can't rely on them totally, particularly with drought and wind-driven fires for the future. There's just no stopping some of them. So we can do to minimise fuels, but we can't stop future fires, that's for sure, particularly in areas like South Turramurra, surrounded by bushland. So there has to be other methods as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And this is the whole basis of the Climate Wise Communities project, is shared responsibility. Everybody pitching in to help reduce the risk. Okay, so now that the fire has gone a fair way down, we're going to have a look and see what happens when the wind changes direction. So there was, as you can see, the direction that the fire's been going is towards the southeast as the wind's coming from the northwest. And if we assume a southerly buster has just rolled in and the wind is now coming from the south and going to the north, And the fire responds very quickly to that change in wind direction. And you will see the fire front, which was the flank of the fire before, the side of the fire, now is coming the fire front. So instead of progressing to the southwest, it's very rapidly going to the north. Now, some areas have already been burnt out and other areas are now in the firing line that probably were breathing a sigh of relief because they thought they would be fine. So in this kind of scenario, Sam, how is RFS handling such a vast number of properties being in the firing line?
We're not having a good day, clearly. Because of the wind speed, that there's no opportunity here to use aerial support. I would imagine the M2, the Commonara, and several other major roads would be closed to through traffic. It's very likely no residents would be allowed to re-enter their home community. And so that's something to put into your fire plan as well. We would have as many resources on the ground doing property protection and possibly assisting police to enable evacuation to some of these areas. There would be multiple emergency warnings being put out that would come both over the phone and through the various apps to keep you safe. But you can see from this, the amount of properties that are being impacted. The best place for you to be on a day like this, when this is happening, is somewhere else. And that's why we just keep coming back to leave early. You know, you prepare yourself and you prepare your family and your home, and then you can leave early and stay safe. Because on a catastrophic day, like Mark and everyone else has mentioned, that it's very unlikely that any home can withstand a fire of this magnitude. And these fires are actually following paths of fires that have happened historically. So I'm sure there are people in the audience that may well remember fires that have gone through West Pymble and South Turramurra in the past. And so, you know, with the changing climate, this is only going to happen more often.
Right. Thanks, Sam. Yes, something we probably should have mentioned, if you're either left it too late to leave and you're going to have to shelter in place at home, where is the safest place to shelter? Now, the research shows that the safest place is on the lee side of the wind, so away from the direction of the wind's blowing, side of the house, inside, in a room that has access to the outside and access to the inside, so preferably 2 doors. And you can also see out of it and see what the fire is doing. Now, when the fire front passes, you need to go outside and have a look as to whether or not your roof is smouldering, because the embers can get in, and sometimes the fire doesn't fully ignite until an hour or 2 after the fire front has passed. And there's been more than a few people killed by being inside when the roof is caved in on them, which is fully alight. So you've really got to keep an eye on that roof space and see whether or not any embers have caught up there. So this is the scenario now. So we're going to look at the last step of climate-wise communities. And it's about working with your neighbours so that you collectively can build your resilience. So if one person improves their resilience, it's great. But if a whole street does it, then the likelihood is you're going to recover much more quickly and with a lot less stress, because you'll have each other organised and interdependent on how to handle things when they occur. So at the moment we're crafting Climate-Wise Communities 2.0, and this whole section is going to be upgraded. But at the moment it is again a series of questions. It starts with that mud map, which allows you to mark on that mud map who in your area might be of assistance to you should you require it, who might need assistance, and importantly, who are you going to tell about when you intend to leave and where you're going to go, because people will, relatives and friends, want to be able to check up on where you are and how you are. And you'll know that every time there's a major event, the Red Cross just gets thousands of calls because people can't contact relatives and friends and they don't know what fate has befallen them. So having that somewhere to go and someone knows what you intend to do is just so important. Okay, and as you scroll down, it's about getting to know your neighbours, getting contact details. You might meet as a group every now and then and discuss how you might help each other in leading up to a bushfire event or during a bushfire event, and also recovery after a bushfire event. Now, what we hope to do with the new version of this section in ClimateWise 2.0 is that we'll have neighbourhood networks set up, and those neighbourhood networks will be able to liaise directly with the local emergency management committee after an event has happened and work out the best ways to run the recovery. So they've realised after quite a few disasters now that they need to incorporate the community voice more in these disaster recovery plans. And so we're hoping this is the way we will be able to do it in Ku-ring-gai. So scrolling on down, it just teases out some more issues that you may not have thought of. Again, with the pets, it comes back again to the pets. And if your neighbours have pets, how you might be of assistance in getting them out. Always good to know the animal and the animal knows you if you are going to try and handle it. Like Penny said, dog bites and cat scratches are pretty common. And scrolling down a little further. So there's just a few more questions about the resources in the area, you know, whether a neighbour has a pool pump, whether the neighbour has a pool, whether you've got static water SWS signs on the front of your property, which indicates to RFS and fire and rescue that there is a water resource on your property, either by way of a tank dedicated to water tank for firefighting purposes, or a pool that they can get water from. Where to get the information from on an extreme event, we've spoken about that, and that ABC and hazards near me tend to be the two best ones. Communicating with others in your household. What happens if the kids are at school and you're at home, or vice versa, the kids are at home and you're away working? So you've got to think, how will I communicate with the kids and how will they follow the plan without you being there? Battery powered and portable radios, of course, and the trigger of when to leave. Now this is, and we've said it quite a few times this evening, probably the most important decision of all of them. And the trigger to leave needs to be conservative. You want to err on the side of, I have overestimated the time that I required rather than underestimated the time I required to evacuate. Now, Penny's mentioned about the health implications and how you get yourself out with all your medicines and catering for your health needs. Sam, I'm sure, will support me if I say you don't need to be rescuing people when you're trying to do property protection. And the chances that you do rescue people, there's just never going to be enough fire trucks to do that. So people need to rely on themselves. So you need to have your plan sorted out. You need to think how you're going to rescue yourself. And so when you return home after the event, Penny, from a health perspective, when people return home, what are some of the challenges they face?
Huge challenges, and it depends a lot on what happened during the event, what they did, if they left early or they stayed late. We have a huge amount of evidence now that shows that, you know, some of the traumatic events that people have gone through in staying behind and trying to defend and then trying to leave once it got too late has been really, really difficult, and particularly thinking about the children as well. You know, we've had back in the 2009 Victorian bushfires, we had what you described earlier, where a fire was going one way and suddenly it swung around and went another way up through Kinglake and wiped out a lot of that community. And people were there, they were home, and some people had left early and some people hadn't. And, you know, the things that some children saw they should never have seen, the decisions that some families made where there was a split decision about leaving and staying, and some people stayed and others left, and the outcomes were not always good. So it depends a lot on what's happened. But the recovery, you know, hopefully most people have, you know, this group will now be hopefully prepared and organised, and that gives you a powerful step into recovery. But the really key things, we worked with lots of the teachers and some of the children following some of the bushfires. And one of the things they really thought was important was getting back to normality. So you want to get back into normal routine for families, for communities. You want the schools to open. You want people to start doing their normal things. From a health perspective, you really want to get back into healthy, normal life. So you want to make sure, one of the doctors I know, he got heavily into exercise, and he said, if I hadn't exercised and started doing marathons, I don't know how I would have coped. The exercising helped his sleep. He then got the community doing marathons, and that brought the community together and got them exercising. So there was that sort of added benefit. Eating well, not drinking extra alcohol, smoking more. Those things are seen to rise after disasters, and they don't help. Making sure that in the cleanup, you're aware of all the hazards, and Sam and Mark will both be very aware of this. There's a lot of hazards following a bushfire. And so things like people go out to try and move everything back, and there's risk of tetanus, there's risk of sometimes of asbestos. There's all sorts of chemicals that are in your shed that are now somewhere around the grounds and where you live, and sometimes live electrical wires. So there's a lot of things like that as well. So again, you need to have things like your vaccinations up to date. You need to have your tetanus up to date. You know, for some reason, and, you know, back Victorian bushfires, the Black Summer bushfires, they all occur in summer and during the heat, and then winter hits when the flu comes. Your immune system's suppressed by going through these events. You need to have your flu vaccine. You need to have, you know, you need to be physically fit. So we talked about preparing your home and making sure that was ready and resilient. You really need to make your body resilient. Physically fit, healthy, vaccinated, with a really strong plan is what you need to do, and that will help with the recovery.
Great. Thanks, Benny. Okay, in the last parts of the Climate Wise Communities website, we look at the, oh, by the way, down there at the bottom there, I forgot the different templates you can use to write your plan. So you can go to RFS. They've got their bushfire survival plan template. Storms and floods are covered by SES. The Red Cross has a multi-hazard planning template that also covers heat waves. And Carers Australia has one that's specifically designed for people looking after elderly or people with disabilities. So whichever template is the one you need, there is one out there already, and you can use the very good information you will produce from going through this exercise to write your bushfire plan in a way that is going to be well thought out and actually have a reasonably good chance of doing a successful job on the day when you need it. after Black Saturday, RMIT researchers had a survey going of the people who were actually impacted by the fire, and less than 5% of them had a bushfire plan. And of that 5%, they were asked, how effective was your bushfire plan? And almost everybody said their plan didn't work on the day. And the reason why their plan didn't work on the day was because they were expecting the fire to occur in a certain way, and it occurred in a very different way. Or something happened that was unexpected, and it meant they couldn't follow through with their plan. So one of the major things that we try to incorporate into ClimateWise is your ability to incorporate contingencies for when unexpected things happen. And one of the tools we have, which James will shift to now, is called the what if tool. Now, this tool is from the RMIT research, and it has on it, it's like a chocolate wheel, and James calls it the wheel of misfortune. And it has on it a number of different things that happened in Black Saturday that basically stuffed up people's plans. And so you can see, what would you do if one of these things happened to you? So James, do you want to spin the wheel and we'll see where we land? So when you've done your plan, you can use this as a little bit of a test to see how you might address this problem. Okay, you're underinsured. Now, a lot of people being underinsured find that a very compelling reason to stay and defend. Even though, as we've talked about, staying and defending is almost a suicide mission. And as Penny has said, they may not be in the health condition to stay and defend, but nevertheless they do. And the outcomes are usually not good. So you've got to think about that and allow, as Mark said, that extra money to build back to a higher BAL rating. So he gave you a few values up to $100,000 more to build up to the maximum BAL level. So that's something you need to consider when you're doing your insurance. So we'll just spin it one more time. You can look at this at your leisure. And so you're unsure whether to leave. So we've talked tonight about predetermining your trigger to leave, making a decision that when you're going to go, and sticking to that decision, and being conservative about that decision. Always allow more time than you think you really will need. And then you should be safe. So this is brings us to the end of the formal presentation, but James has something to add about how we can support you in making changes to make your property more resilient.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Yes, Ku-ring-gai Council has a series of rebate programs that can aid residents to do a whole range of things. But in the context of tonight's presentation, the one rebate program we do have that can really help you is the BushfireWise rebate program. This rebate program offers residents up to 25% of the cost of any retrofit they do to make their house more resilient to bushfire, to a maximum of $1,000. There's also a top-up of, say, 50% of the DA fees or CDC fees to a maximum of $500. That's to help with any application fees for retrofits that require DA, such as windows, replacement windows, and replacement doors. However, that DA or the rebate program does not apply for residents doing new builds, where the conditions of consent require them to make their home more bushfire resilient. It's only really for existing properties that are replacing features of the house to make those features more bushfire resilient. if you were to do a renovation, or if you were to build an addition to your house, for example, an extension, and that extension requires bushfire resilient features as per the DA or CDC, well, then you would not qualify for rebate. However, if you have a house and you want to make it more bushfire resilient, you can get a rebate. And the type of things that you can get a rebate for include fixing up the roof, replacing ridge cap mortar, replacing old acrylic skylights with modern skylights with toughened glass, enclosing eaves, and covering the fascias with steel, blocking chimneys, putting gutter guards in, replacing windows, replacing doors, fixing up the garage floor, and emberproofing the subfloor space, as well as replacing the deck with fire-resistant materials. We also can help you out with a rainwater tank. However, we do have a rainwater tank rebate program. So a rainwater tank is best installed using that rebate program and saving your rebate allocation for other items. To apply for your rebate, all you need to do is go to Council's webpage, search for bushfire-wide rebates or rebates in general, and you should be able to find the bushfire one. Click this green button here called Submit Your Pre-Approval Application, and then fill out the details, and I will be in contact with you about how to proceed. All you need to do to proceed would be to submit a bushfire survival plan, step 3 of the Climate-Wise Communities Ready Check tool, which Jenny went through, along with any quotes or specifications of the work you want to do to make your house more bushfire resilient. And then I would give you a pre-approval number, and you can go ahead and do the work. When you complete the work, you submit your final claim application and include with that your proof of payment of the work that's been completed, along with any photographs that's included as well. So that's that. If you have any questions about applying for rebate, please do not hesitate to contact me. You can contact me through the switchboard of Ku-ring-gai Council or via email. So over to you, Jenny, or maybe over to you, Jenny, and perhaps later on we can do some Q&A, some answers some questions. Jenny, you're mute. You're on mute.
It's just that when we're sitting in one room, Mark and I, with 2 computers, and we get echoes. Yeah, no, I think we're ready for Q&A now, unless one of the speakers wants to add something before we go over to Q&A. No? Everybody happy?
Okay, in that case, I will start reading out the questions. We have a question from Joe regarding lightning conductors that can prevent this sort of damage that can be seen that we saw in the Gospers Mountain fire progression. Now, I'm no expert in lightning, but I would imagine that would be a pretty tricky thing to do in a World Heritage area, given the scale, the size of the area. In urban areas, I think houses have lightning strips on their properties, and that tends to deal with lightning. But again, perhaps there's someone more knowledgeable about lightning that can answer that question.
Yeah, James. Certainly in the distant areas to the north and northwest of us in Ku-ring-gai, the big fires will come, the landscape scale fires, and they will virtually come from World Heritage areas where that type of thing is unfortunately unfeasible, really. And yeah, within the urban areas, you'll get shorter fire runs where probably that issue isn't so big. So, yeah.
And I think, sorry, I was just going to say, in a storm in Sydney last week, the Sydney metro area alone had 19,000 lightning strikes. So,
You'll never stop it.
Yeah, just way too many.
We've a comment from Virginia that she found the fires in the app particularly useful and reassuring. I believe that has now been replaced with hazards EME, which was discussed earlier. So Virginia also mentions that neighborhood watch network. Good idea. How can our street provide information before an emergency event? And on that note, I think I'll pass that one over to Jenny, because that's something we're working on. Something similar anyway.
Yes, thanks, James. The Climate-Wise Communities 2.0 is, as I said, looking at developing these neighbourhood networks. Now, we're still in the early days of the neighbourhood design of that, how that's going to work. And but we hope to have something up and running before the next fire season. And it will utilise existing networks like Neighbourhood Watch and the community fire units if they're willing. And we will also set up any new ones so that these people will be given some resources to help them organise themselves and get their street connected and working together on this resilience. I can't give you the finer detail of that just yet, but that's the objective that we're looking at.
Okay, great. Would the Nextdoor app be useful as a resource for something similar like this? I'm not overly familiar with the Nextdoor app, but I'd imagine anything that can be used to connect yourself with your neighbors and create those networks where you can share resource information would be, of course, of real value. That's something which Jenny and I are working on. However, you know, by all means, if there's something out there that you can use to connect with your neighbors, we'd highly suggest trying it out and seeing if it works. Now, regarding the bushfire retrofit rebate of 25% up to $1,000 in cash, you're right, it won't necessarily pay for someone's renovation, and it depends. If you're talking about gutter guards, it will go, it's a decent amount of money to help someone swap out their gutter guards. So in many cases, in applications I've worked on, it comes up to literally 25% of their gutter guards expenses. So that's, you know, 25% of a cost does go somewhere. However, if you're talking about a replacement deck or bushfire windows in a flame zone house or flame zone door, yes, $1,000 might not be a huge amount. However, the part of the intention behind it is also to just give people just a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of an incentive just to go ahead and do it, because you know, there's that intention knowledge gap. There's a bit of a gap between what people plan on doing and what they actually do. So apart from the financial element of it, it does serve as a bit of a nudge, bit of an encouragement to get people to just do what they plan on doing anyway. So sometimes people find money helps, and that's one of the things we do there. So and it goes, as local government, we're not in the business of covering the cost of people's renovations. So we're trying to help. But that's that. Okay, so now Howard also commented on the value of community fire units. Now we were hoping to have someone from Fire and Rescue come along, but they're not here. But so perhaps Jenny or Sam would like to talk about that. Who would like to take that?
Certainly, from the experience that we've had here, we've had conversations with a number of community fire units in Ku-ring-gai, and the great thing about them is that they are already very well prepared they know the people in the street, they know who needs help, they know how they're going to react when an event comes. They're well organised, they've got some resources, and Fire and Rescue looks after that program. And I do encourage anyone who has got a few able-bodied people in their street who might be interested in forming a community fire unit to have a chat to the local fire and rescue people, and they'll send someone out to have a talk to you about how they do it, and there's no cost implication. It's all completely cost neutral. So yeah, no, it's a good program. So Sam, did you want to say something?
Just to add that I agree with you, and the CFU, you're actually provided with training and a uniform, and you act in the capacity when a fire might impact your property to manage spot fires. So you're not actually left to manage the front of a bushfire. You're there to support your home coming out the other end, and hopefully we would be in your street as well, and could support you to do that, so that we could then move on to the next street, which, as you could see in the simulation you developed today, that it's very likely it's going to be fast moving and impact many properties. So having a CFU really does build resilience in your local community.
Great. Okay, cool. We have a question from Carol. Will council clear some vegetation along the reserves? For example, Bradley, and I think Mark, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, I know Bradley pretty well, actually, Carol. And yeah, very limited along the edges, certainly where we have asset protection zones. And council, we've been looking at that very closely in the last few months, actually, to work out which asset protection zones might be effective in minimising risk. If you clear a broad asset protection zone, say take it from 10 metres up to 40 to 50 metres, very limited value for the vegetation you're actually clearing, has limited effectiveness. So yeah, there are positives and negatives in that one, and it has to be looked at almost in a case-by-case basis. Because we are the Green Shire also, that's what people have come here for, so we've got to look at that side as well. Such a challenge, asset protection and incorporating biodiversity at the same time. It's the biggest headache I'll ever have in my life, I suppose. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Helen and Phil, I have a question about keeping gutters clear of leaves. Do metal gutter guards help prevent fires? Sam is nodding her head. Yes, I think they do.
Metal's much better than plastic.
Much better than plastic, and much better than those little spiky things people stick in the gutters, which are, again, not great. Now, it's not necessarily, those metal gutter guards are not included in the building for bushfire standards, the AS 3959. Yeah. However, in the bushfire building conference that myself and Mark and Jenny attend on occasion, there has been strong evidence to say that they do work, and it was recommended by the experts at the conference to install those. So, as a low-cost effort, as a low-cost retrofit, they would be a good first thing to do. And if you wanted to, do something that's cheap, quick, and effective, do that. However, I'd highly recommend doing step 3 of the ready check tool, which you saw tonight. Find out where your highest risks are and prioritize which ones you can do, followed by the lesser risk ones. So if it means that your windows are the biggest risk, well then I'd highly suggest maybe working towards replacing those windows, because as Jenny mentioned, windows can often be the weakest part of a house during a bushfire. Comms can really be tricky. If mobile towers go as they did in the 2019-20 fires, and my brother who was helping with the fires down in Bateman Bay, he had to also go, sorry, I'm going to read that again, had to help with the fires down in Bateman Bay, had also ABC go offline because of damage to their connections. So any suggestions with that? Okay. Who would like to take that one? Communications, alternatives.
I guess if the local broadcaster ABC station goes offline, that's really unfortunate. But if you're able to have access to your car radio, if you're talking about offline as in within your home, and you were perhaps streaming it digitally, having it on your car radio tuned into whatever your local radio ABC station is will help keep you up to date if you do lose power in the home.
Jenny?
Oh, I was just going to say, or a transistor radio.
I think this would be a good point. I think this scenario might be covered in the what if scenario. There, what if you just can't get the information? That is an exercise to work through and work out your alternatives. So, if I would suggest maybe, what if you couldn't get the information? Well, where would you get the information from, or where would be a safe place for you to go to, that you would be at least safe from the fire, such as a place of last resort or something like that. That's a problem to work through with your family and brainstorm that one, I think. Yeah. Okay. Given the vulnerability of South Turramurra, should the water supply be improved? Now, I think that's a very difficult one to do, because the infrastructure is huge, and bigger pipes aren't necessarily going to, financially, it's not going to really happen. And I believe Sam has something to say about that as well. So I'll pass it to Sam.
Every fire that I've fought at to protect property, the pressure of water has been impacted, and it doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure there is. If you're drawing massive amounts of water to fill, say, 50 fire trucks that require at least 3,000 litres each, water is never going to be readily available on site. I know during the 2003 fires, West Pymble and area field lost all water pressure, and we actually had to have water trucked in bulk water carriers to supply us. So I guess having enough water, and that's why we sometimes recommend filling your sinks and bathtubs with water, so that you can actually deal with spot fires if you were indeed going to stay rather than leave early.
Yes, I spoke to some people who were in the Blue Mountains fire, and all the residents emptied out their wheelie bins and filled them with water. And that was a water resource for them to use as a backup for when the fire came through.
Okay. Going back to comms, what is your opinion on the Starlink subscription, given that mobile phone and power seem to be the first things to go? So, Sam, she's waving her hand. She wants to answer this one. So let's go over to you, Sam.
That's how you're receiving me at the moment. However, Starlink still requires power to run the modem and access. So my experience also is that in the event of most major fires, that you will also lose power along with your water. So if you do feel that a satellite connection might work for you, you would still need a generator to be able to access that in the event.
There you go. Sam Starlink, one is failing her right now. I believe someone tell Elon Musk to bump up the signal. Yes, also, or perhaps to add to Sam's point, maybe a battery storage, if you have a solar and battery setup there. See, what can they do if and when their neighbor is not managing their trees? Mark, I think that branch has landed in your side of the fence.
Yeah, difficult one. We manage a lot of our own vegetation, and actually single trees, if it's just a single tree, there's probably little that can be done really, or little effectiveness. It's more clumpings or big groups of trees, they're the real issue. And we have little jurisdiction, in private property, of course. Although a lot of friendly carrot talk, convincing can help, and you need to be a bit of a bush psychologist like I am to do a bit of that. So yeah, that can help, but I'd use the carrot rather than stick in that type of situation. Just put out to the residents the real benefits that can come by keeping their place nice and clean and breaking up the continuity of the vegetation. Yeah, that's the way I would go. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Mark. I was at a conference last year and they said that in the Black Summer fires, the houses that had a for sale sign at the front survived fires better because they were neat and tidy. The landscaping was nice and neat and good looking. The shrubbery and hedges were kept low and trimmed and shaped so that you didn't have the ladder effect where the vegetation was going to carry a flame up into the canopy of the tree. So there you go. So if that's one way of looking at it. Imagine you're selling your house. What would it need to look like? And that's what you're aiming for in terms of landscape management. As a general rule, I guess it gets more complicated than that, and I'll let Mark and Sam discuss that. Last time in the Fires Near Me app suggested that people of South Turramurra evacuate to shops near the Pacific Highway, Kissing Point Road. However, when they were about to leave, suddenly the app said it's too late to evacuate. So what to do if this happens again?
Both emergency warnings through, and I believe it said to shelter in place. So Jenny did mention some of the strategies to take when that happens, and I know in some of the major fire events, leaving at this moment can actually put you at greater risk than taking in a residence. So finding a spot in the house opposite the incoming wind direction and potentially the flame, and to get out past.
So Sam, your connection.
You don't want.
Jenny, could you jump in there while Sam's connection improves?
Yeah, I mean, if you take the South Turramurra fire, the Canoon Road fire, that happened on a catastrophic fire day. And we have now a lot of, schools and sporting groups, and certainly any council property down in bushland areas won't open on those days when there's a catastrophic fire warning. And the advice was to leave and go out for the day, spend the day at the shops or at the movies. Don't be there. And so that leave early advice. Catastrophic fire days are when the fire will behave in its most erratic form. And the mapping that is done back in headquarters of RFS depends on photographs being taken by aircraft flying continuously over the area that's on fire and reporting back, as well as information coming from the ground on where the fire is at. And they have very sophisticated mapping tools and software to forecast where they need to deploy their assets to next. So it's not foolproof. And because of as we showed you today, the way the fire can behave, things like the first warning you get is to shelter in place are going to happen. And so the best thing is to not be there. So that's the main piece of advice on those catastrophic and high risk days. If you live near bushland, is to go out for the day.
Yeah, Jenny, absolutely agree. I think the other thing is we've also learned that if you do get told not to leave, it's too late to leave. It is too late to leave, and to not start trying to leave. And we unfortunately saw a lot of casualties when that happened in previous bushfires. So you're ready to go, but you also, part of your plan has to be, if you have to stay, what will you do, I guess.
Okay, Sam, do you want to try and say something now? Has your connection improved?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're back.
Oh, perfect. I basically said what everybody else has said.
Okay. Perfect.
The reality is that you will not always get warning. South Turramurra, those warnings to shelter in place came within 10 minutes of the fire starting. So, I think that just reinforces being able to have the capacity to leave early. So having a clear trigger, like if your health is impaired or your meal is impaired, or you have other caregiver who young pets or that on catastrophe, best being home. And you receive a alert level from hazard near me that says to watch an act, and it's going to take you to get out of leave then. To have triggers that are above and beyond your normal life is really a good idea.
Okay, I think we might have lost Sam again. Yeah. Sorry, Sam, but you really kind of dropped out now. Yeah. Howard has another question about how to deal with neighbor property related risks. Can anything be done? Mark, I think, can you answer that one?
Yep. Again, the carrot approach rather than the stick, and emphasise to the neighbours. Look, if they could actually be putting other people at risk, not just themselves, if something wasn't done. But then it is a touchy subject with your neighbours, and council certainly realises that too. Seeing, as I said, we have little jurisdiction. There is a 1050 rule for some vegetation clearing on your property, but that's quite limited and restrictive too, and it shouldn't be applied grossly or too much. So yeah, it's a very touchy subject because people see their own property as their own domain, I suppose.
The only thing I could add to that was perhaps when the recording comes out for this webinar, send them the link to the webinar and have them view the sim table scenarios and past fire reconstructions. So that's one. If they see that, perhaps you guys might be able to have a civil conversation about what can be done to address the risks. Okay, does Turramurra have an evacuation center or an oval which is considered a safe place for evacuees? I recall in one recent bushfire that the nearest designated place was at St. Ives Village Green.
Nothing in South Turramurra, and I wouldn't want to place myself in South Turramurra on an open space like Aluba either. So Karua Street up at Turramurra is the nearest designated neighbourhood safer place, but still quite a way away, just because that area is very bushfire prone.
So again, that sounds like.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'd just like to place is it's not a.
Oh, Sam, I think it's the aliens have interrupted your Starlink connection. I'm sorry, Sam. Perhaps
I think what Sam might have been going to
type
say,
an answer into the Q&A box while we address the other ones. Perhaps Sam, could you do that? Thanks.
I think what Sam was going to say was that neighbourhood safer places are only a place of very last resort and not to be deferred to too easily. So yeah, keep that in mind, please. Thanks.
Yeah, and that speaks to the whole leave early message. Just leave early and don't rely on that one. But anyway, so we saw someone agree with the idea of using buckets in pools or wheelie bins. It looks like the Hazards Near Me app has erased all information put into the Fire Near Me app. Certainly has done so on my phone. I actually updated my fires Near Me app to the Hazards Near Me app, and my watch zones were preserved. So don't know what happened there, David. So by the way, the neighborhoods. Sorry, okay, but that's not much. That's not a question. That's more of a comment. So I think if anyone has any other questions, please put them in now. Otherwise, we're getting pretty close to 9 o'clock, and I'm sure everyone's pretty keen to wrap it up for the night. And I think Howard said, just in case anyone was wondering, that's not him that's raising all the neighborhood questions. So it sounds like he might have neighborhood issues, but he was supposed to say it wasn't him. So I think there's a bit of a disclaimer there. Everyone wants to play nice with the neighbors. It's good. So, okay. So last chance for any comments from the presenters. I'll do that. I'll leave it open to our special guest, Penny, for any final comments on mental health. And I forgot, there is something I wanted to do for everyone. I need to run a poll for Penny's program she's running. Penny, do you want to talk about that?
Just that we're, so the Sydney North Health Network, which sort of covers this region, is working with the local health district, with the hospitals, and we're trying to help improve the health delivery during disasters in our area. And so part of that is working with the council, but part of it is also working with the community. And we're actually really keen to work with the South Turramurra community if they would like to. And the aim is to help better prepare for your health and before a disaster. And we know that preparing improves the outcomes. And so one of the best ways to be healthy, body and mind, after a disaster is to actually prepare your health beforehand, as well as your fire or hazard plan. So we're actually just looking to see if anyone's willing to participate in a focus group meeting on the 21st of March, either morning or evening. So if people are interested, then we would send you an email just to see to follow that up. If not, that's fine. But it was just something we're trying to improve, and without having the community input, it's very hard to move this forward.
Thank you, Penny. I've put a poll question in front of everyone. This is your opportunity to indicate whether or not you would like to participate in this project that Penny's involved in. So I'll leave the poll question up for an extra minute, so it should be fairly easy for everyone to answer. And one thing, I didn't mean to send up a pre-workshop poll to capture that. I can't do that now because that's supposed to be before the workshop. But the next thing I'd like to do is, again, ask you ask our participants if you would like to get a reminder email, 3 emails to remind you to make a bushfire survival plan, because making a plan, bushfire, especially when it comes to something as scary as bushfire, can be a bit daunting, and it is something that people tend to want to push off to a later date. And we find that sending people reminders to encourage them to make a bushfire plan can be very helpful, because it is something which people don't always want to tackle with gusto. So if you want, I can send you 3 emails over the course of a couple of months. The emails would give you tips and suggestions and strategies on how to make a bushfire survival plan. And yeah, so when I end this poll, I'll put up a new one, and you can indicate whether or not you'd like to get a reminder email from me. So I think I'll end the poll now. I think everyone who would like to respond has responded. Okay, thank you very much for that, everyone. And I'll launch that next poll, and I'll try and be very quick with that one because it is already a bit late. So the poll should be in front of you now. So if you'd like to receive a reminder to make a bushfire survival plan, please tick yes for question 2, and also tick yes in question 1 if you intend on making a written bushfire survival plan in the next month or so. So it's okay if you don't want, if you say no, there's no pressure here, but yeah, it's up to you. So Jenny, would you like to make any final comments while people are filling in the poll? Questions?
No, other than that we've given everyone a great deal of information and hopefully a lot of food for thought tonight, and having the experts along to assist with this program is making it all the richer and all the more valuable. So I think we're very fortunate in Ku-ring-gai to have a council that is really taking bushfire very seriously and throwing resources at it.
Here, Jenny.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about working together, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed. And so I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone who attended tonight's webinar. Thank you very much to the residents of South Turramurra. Your participation in this workshop is incredibly valuable because the more people that are prepared for bushfires, the safer everyone is. So it does take a community approach to become prepared for bushfires and stay safe, because we're only as strong as the links between each other. So thank you again. Thank you to Sam Tucker from the RFS for coming along. Dr. Penny Burns, thank you again very much to our special guest coming along, and of course Mark Schuster and Jenny Scott. And thank you to everyone for answering the poll questions we put up there. And I think I'll end the webinar now. So again, thank you very much. Okay, so would anyone, we'll do a debrief maybe around the corner, Jenny and Mark, and Penny will be in touch after.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I think,
and Sam,
fantastic session.
Oh, thank you very much. We'll try. And Sam, again, thank you very much for coming along. Your participation.
Bye.
Bye. Bye all.
Okay.
Bye. Sorry about my comms.
No problem, Sam. You did pretty well considering the connection.
It's usually okay. Anyway, I'll see you soon, guys.
Okay. Be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.